everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from May 14th, 2021, and I'm recording this on November 11th, 2021. As always, what we're doing here is we're looking back at the hot comics from 6 months ago, trying to understand what made them hot, why people were chasing them, what factors led to them hitting these lists, and then trying to determine what, if anything, has changed since then. They call these books to cool off or fall back in value, whether or not being patient would have been worth it, or if you should have just went after them. As always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. So there's a potential for up to 20 books. This week we have 18 different books on the two lists. So let's get into it, see what we can learn. First up, we have Bitter Root #1. Basically, we had known this had been optioned before this. Book had been on the list a while ago, but then we got news that Regina King was attached and was working as part of this show going forward. That caused it to re-hit the list. Back then, raw values were going for $75 to $125 for this series. 9.8s were hitting 300. At the time, I kind of said, I predicted this one would be worth it. It has stayed basically in that same range. As raw copies are 75 to 125 still. 9.8s have gotten a little variation, but it's anywhere from 150 to 400 on a 9.8 on this one. I do feel like that 150 was maybe one that slipped through the radar a little bit. It was an auction that just went for lower. Yeah, so we'll see. It's going to be a while on this one still yet, but so far this one has definitely held its value and been worth it. There's a lot of people, I think, anticipating this particular series coming to the screen. Next, we have, and I will say, that bucks the normal option news trend by far for it to actually have stayed worth it. Next, we have Marvel Team Up #14. This is, again, kind of in the aftermath of the Invincible Season 1 coming out on Amazon. This Invincible Spidey crossover hit the list. People were chasing this book. Raw copies of this thing were going for $100 to $125. Seems like a lot for this little crossover, but now they're kind of $30 to $125. There's a couple of them still up there, but for the most part, they're under $100. In the 60s kind of range, 40 to 80 kind of dollars is for most of these sales are. 9.8 will run you $300 to $400 still. This one definitely it has dropped back down a little bit from the craziness of when the show was coming out. It definitely turned into a bit of an I'll be back. Next, we have Magic Order #1, and this was basically, we've known that this has been optioned by Netflix for a long time as part of their kind of Millarverse they're working on. There was news that maybe they was potentially going to go into production soon at Netflix. At the time of the launch of the Jupiter's Legacy series, so that caused this book to hit the list. $5 to $10 is all it's going for. This was one of those Tom ones that's like, is it really hot? 9.8s were going for $100. Still kind of going 5 to 20. There's actually a few sales above that $10 range, but 9.8s are down to 40 to 60. This is definitely, it's been pretty steady on the raw side, which is most of the sales. Still a little bit on I'll be back. And yeah, we'll see if this actually gets made, given what happened with the next book we're going to talk about. And that is Jupiter's Legacy #1. This hit the list for the second time in about a month. Because first time it was when the trailer dropped, then this is when the show dropped. So raw copies were up to $25, and 9.8 went for $220. Now raw copies are going for $1 to $5. 9.8's going for $20 to $50. You heard that right, $20 to $50. This has turned into a massive dumpster fire. This show was widely panned. I know there's a few people who said it actually got bet. It actually was pretty good if you hung with it after the first couple episodes, but most people, I don't think, did. So this one has definitely come crashing back down and was definitely not a good investment if you chased it when the show was coming out. With that, we're going to move away from option TV kind of stuff and move into covers. And our first cover this week is Zatanna #16. This is the one of the Adam Hughes covers. This is the last one in the series, so it's a little underprinted. Plus, this red cover is super hard to get in high grade. Back then, raw copies of this book had jumped all the way up to $250, which is really high for this book compared to what it had been pretty steady at over the last few years. Now it's going for $60 to $125 for a raw copy. So this is backed up considerably, basically back down kind of where it was at before this little surge back in the spring. 9.8, so run you $650 to $800. Again, they're pretty hard to get. But I will say there's been no 9.8 sales since early September, and really only 6 sales since the 1st of October, because people are still asking a little bit on the higher end of what this was doing in the spring. So sale or listing prices haven't really caught up with where it's actually going, that it's back down kind of where it was before all this craziness back in the spring. So this one definitely turned into a bit of a trap. Gorgeous cover, a book I would love to have that I don't, but maybe someday. With prices coming back, maybe it is realistic I could get this one. So next we have Beta Ray Bill #1. This is the second print, Ryan Stegman 1 in 25. You guys know how I feel about second print ratio variants, but they keep doing it because people keep buying them. This one jumped to a $50 to $60 book at release. People were chasing this. People really enjoy. I heard a lot of people say really good things about this Beta Ray Bill run. But this book has also turned into a bit of a trap. There's only been 3 recent sales, period, of this book in the last couple of months. That was a $10 sale, a $20 sale, and a $50 sale on the raw side. So this one has definitely turned into a trap. People are still asking 30, 40, 50 bucks. People aren't willing to pay it. I didn't really get why people were, this was just a color variation of another cover. So yeah, I didn't particularly think this cover was that great for a Stegman cover, but and it has definitely backed up as a result. Next, we have the Department of Truth #1, the 5th print secret variant, hence the reason it's listed as 2021 on the release date, because this came out. And basically they had a secret variant with it, but it was only a 1 in 5, but people still were chasing it for crazy money. $60 to $100 is what this book was going for when it first came out. Now it's a $15 to $50, so again, a pretty wide range on these. Most of the sales are kind of in that 20 to 35-ish range, but you're getting, 15 to 50 on a full range on this one on raw copies. 9.8s will run you 100 to 150, which is pretty standard for a $30-ish book for on the raw side. But this definitely turned into a bit of a trap, not nearly the values that it was getting when it was first released. Next, we're going to move into Comic Buzz, and this is Hank Howard, Pizza Detective in Caligula is Safe, #1. This is another bad idea book, and it turned into another bad idea to have chased. Raw copies back then were going for $15 to $20. Now they're it's a $5 to $10 book, still above cover, but definitely back down. 9.8 went for $60, and really, I say that there's only been one, so it's $5 to $10 book, slightly above cover, but there's only been one sale since the beginning of October. So there's just not any interest in this. This seems to be the case with a bunch of these bad idea series. They just have not. There's a lot of buzz when they were coming out. People were really interested. It was a different take on the way they were releasing stuff. They were a little more limited. But these books have just not held value. The stories have not held up. They've not held the market's interest. And they're all pretty much coming crashing down. Next on our Comic Buzz is we have G.I. Joe #281. This is the first appearance of Sherlock, a new military police woman that was introduced. It had some buzz. Raw copies back then were going for $10 of this A cover. Now it's kind of a $1 to $10 book. A 9.8, there was one sale of $40. So this definitely turned into an I'll Be Back. It's basically back to a cover price book for the most part. So not a lot of sustained interest, at least at this point, for this particular character. But it didn't hit the list just once. It kind of hit the list twice, because our next book is G.I. Joe #281, the 1 in 10 variant. Also the first appearance of Sherlock, and that was going for 40 plus. But at that point, you're more than triple ratio. Typically on ratio stuff, that's usually what it takes. But there just has not been anything to carry this. So raw copies are down to a $5 to $15 book. Another one that turned into a trap. So the A cover has just been a bit of an I'll be back because it didn't go that high. The B or the 1 in 10, it turned into a trap because it did jump pretty high. So yeah, this was kind of one of the. At the time, there were some people were claiming it was the first female black G.I. Joe character or member, which it turned out it was not the case. So I think maybe that part prompted some of the buzz. Anyway, this book definitely has not sustained what it was doing. Next, we have America Chavez, Made in the USA #3. This is the first appearance of Caitlin Chavez, her sister. Raw copies back then were going for $10 to $15. and still basically going for $10 to $15, double to triple cover price. Kind of a small, that's pretty much the sweet spot for a small key. 9.8 only costs you $50. So this one's been pretty steady. Bit of an I'll be back. You could definitely find deals on this. There was not really a need to chase it. It is out there and available at this stage. With that, we're going to move into a little bit of Sony movie news. All of this was related to the release of the trailer for Venom 2, Let There Be Carnage. So with the release of the trailer back in the spring, Amazing Spider-Man number 361, first appearance of Carnage, hit the list. Back then, raw copies were up to $250 on average. 9.8 hit $1,500, and not a newsstand 9.8, just a regular 9.8. Now raw copies are down to 75 to 200. 9.8s are going for 550, 700, which is basically where they were before all the movie stuff, and that's with the movie coming out, and I think people liking it fairly well, but it just, did not sustain any value or momentum on Carnage, and really, it had dropped back by the time the movie had come out, and even with the release of the movie, really didn't jump very much again. So there's a lot of these available, and people have not really been willing to chase. So this one definitely turned into a bit of a trap over these 6 months. Great book long term, still a really cool character, but just over the last 6 months, this has definitely been a trap if you bought it at the trailer hype, which we've talked about multiple times as being the kind of the peak usually for a lot of these books. Next, we have Spider-Man Unlimited number 1. This is the first appearance of Shriek. We saw Naomi Harris in the trailer. We knew this is who she was playing, so that caused this book to hit the list. There's a billion copies of these things out there, which we talked about at the time. But it was going for $25 raw. 9.8 hit 400. I kind of went with straight cash on the 361 and worth it on this one because I thought, this will be about the time the movie comes out. They'll still be up. Wrong. This one is now a $5 to $15 book. 9.8 is only going to cost you $100 to $150. Another massive trap if you chase this book at the trailer hype. Next, we have Venom versus Carnage, number 1, first appearance of Patrick Mulligan. Technically, they were talking about 1 and 2, because then 2 is his first appearance as Toxin. I'm just talking about number 1 here for the breakdown. Raw copies back then were up to $125 to $150. A 9.8 hit 600 plus. Even this one I thought was too far. I was like, this is probably not going to be a main character. It's going to be mostly about Venom and Carnage. Now raw copies are down to $30 to $60 on this book. 9.8s are down to $150 to $400. Again, a wide range on those 9.8s, depending on how far back you go, but still way down from what it was at the trailer hype. Definitely another trap book. So with that, we got the last 4 books are all kind of MCU spec. Moving away from that Venom trailer, we have Avengers Academy number 1. This is the first appearance of Hazmat and Metal and Stryker and Vale and Finesse. And if you're going, who? I can understand. The only one of these I'd even heard of before this book hit the list was Hazmat. But basically people were looking for and specking on, another team book or another book with a bunch of first appearances that might actually come to fruition in the MCU. I don't see them getting this far down the list anytime soon, but people were paying $60 to $70 for this book all of a sudden back in the spring because somebody talked about it, somebody recommended it as a spec book, and now it's a $15 to $35 book. 9.8s will run you $200, but this is definitely a trap if you bought it back then. I mean, I get it as a spec book, but not a spec book that I would pay more than, $15, $20 for. And even then, I don't know that I would. So anyway, but definitely this one turned into a trap. Next, we have Mighty Avengers number 1, second week in a row this was on the list, which was kind of surprising. But this is the first Monica Rambeau as Spectrum. There were some rumors that is the name she was going to take following WandaVision and everything. So raw copies back then were up to 35 to 50. 9.8 was at 300 to 350. Last week when it was on the list, it was a little lower than this. I talked about it being steady and kind of worth it to that point. But it obviously another one of these books that spiked beyond where it settled. And this book is now a $5 to $20 book raw, $2 to $250 for a 9.8. So it actually went from, if you bought it for that $15-$20 range where it was kind of worth it, if you wait till it was $40-$50, then it turned into a definite trap. So definitely another book that, a little bit of patience. If you don't get in at the front end of people starting to spec on stuff, you're probably too late. Be a little more patient on it. So next we have Moon Knight number 188, first appearance of Sun King, who's kind of an avatar of Ra in the Marvel Universe. And basically, this had to do with Ethan Hawke being cast for the Moon Knight show and people speculating that this was going to be the villain or character that he was going to play in the show. I don't know that there was any solid info on this. It was just where people were kind of going. Raw copies of this were going for $15 back then. Still kind of going $10 to $20 range. Again, that's pretty common for any kind of like first appearance, minor key kind of thing. Definitely still an I'll be back. If you'd been patient, you would have done fine. But it has been pretty steady over the last 6 months, even though we've got no news confirming or denying that that's who Ethan Hawke is playing. So, last book of the week this week is Captain America number 352. First team appearance of the Supreme Soviets. Basically, this hit the list because there were rumors that the full Winter Guard was going to appear in the Black Widow movie. Didn't really happen, and these characters didn't really appear. But back then, this was going for $20 to $50. Now it's a $1 to $15 book. So this is another kind of dumpster fire, almost as bad as what happened with the Jupiter's Legacy. So another book that is way, way down because nothing came of this particular spec at this point. So that is this week's list of books. We had a few MCU books that mostly didn't do very well. Really, we had no books that went up. We had 14 books that dropped in value, 4 books that were basically steady. No books that went up this week. So you can see that on kind of the little wrap-up slide. But definitely another week where it would have been worth it to be patient, which is pretty typical of this list. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time.